I'm going to invite Pastor Mike and Marcella up to the front here. We're going to get started in just a minute. Grab a seat and a microphone there, Marcella. Mike has his own mic. A lot of mics. Yeah. Andrew Warner is going to be coming around handing out the job description for senior pastor, and also in there is the background around Mike. These things have all been shared digitally, but it may be helpful to have them. And if I could get Mike Lally, I think there's a slide in Proclaim that has a QR code where we do love some QR codes around here. We do love it. Even if only 3 people use them, we still love them. You're learning, yes. You're learning doctrine and theology and faith and practice and QR codes. Very, very important. So I think that's it. I think that's in Proclaim, Mike, if we want to put that up. But anyway, we're grateful for everyone joining us here today. As you know, we have been in the process of transition for senior pastor. And just to reiterate a couple of things, it's important to remember what we've talked about earlier, which is that the congregation chooses their pastor. The session doesn't pick the pastor. The session and the advisory panel, which was really a means of expanding the involvement of those involved, they don't select the pastor for the church. Part of Presbyterianism is that, just as in Acts 7 when the deacons were selected, that you will select those who will lead you. And so that's the case here with the senior pastor as well. The pulpit committee evaluates and nominates, but you will vote. And so our philosophy as we've approached this is that we've wanted to have a very thorough process. Earlier in the service, we talked about the importance of our leaders, which are our elders, but our senior pastor as well is really critical, and we want to involve the congregation each step of the way. And that's partly why, as a pulpit committee in a session, we had an advisory panel. It wasn't necessary, but we wanted to make sure that because it's the congregation who will select their pastor, that the congregation is involved, that there's means and mechanisms to hear opinions throughout the congregation and to get feedback. And we also wanted to make sure that we went through this in a rigorous manner. Even having a good internal candidate, which we're really, really blessed to have that. We're not in a position where we have to go out and find someone that we just don't know. That can be a real wild card. Even having an internal candidate, though, it's important that, and we felt it was important to make sure we go through a thorough process to make sure that even in that, the proper questions were asked, the proper evaluation was done, that the expectations were set on both sides, and that the evaluation was conducted based on agreed upon expectations so that all of us can move forward knowing that all the right questions have been asked and answered and have a lot of confidence in the process. And so that's been a part of this. And so along the way here, this is really the third in a series of interviews with Pastor Mike and Marcella as well. The first was the first thing we did was lay out the job description, which you have, is to say we want to be very clear about what Crossroads is as a church. There's some very unique, distinctive traits of the culture here, and we want to just clarify that and put that in writing. What are some of those major things? And how does the senior pastor role work here? You can go to lots of different churches, and the senior pastor role can work in a whole host of different ways, even within denominations. But certainly among denominations, there's a wide variety of ways a senior pastor can work. So we wanted to clarify that and specify that so it's clear for all, and then make sure that we evaluate based upon that. And so Pastor Mike sat with the advisory panel earlier this week, and they were able to conduct an interview and ask a series of questions. He and Marcella met with the pulpit committee, which is the session minus Mike, who's recused himself, obviously, because he's part of the process. And then we wanted to open it up and have a kind of an interview, if you will, with the congregation as a whole who will vote on the pastor. And so that brings us to today. That's the background on today, not the full background on today. And we want to have time to have questions, but we also wanted to just give Pastor Mike and Marcella a little bit of a chance to share some of their background. Some of that's been sent out, but it's also helpful to hear some of that in person, and that may prompt some questions and things like that. So why don't we start by maybe both of you give us just a little bit of your own personal testimonies, specifically how you came to Christ and where you came to sort of meet one another. And then, Mike, maybe we'll come back and talk a little bit about your call into ministry as well, which I know stretches back and it overlaps with part of your testimony. But maybe just share with us a little bit, a little kind of both of those different things. Mike, maybe you can start.
So, as you may have read, I came to faith at the age of 12. I remember exactly that night. It was a Thursday night in August of 1994. I remember exactly what I was wearing. It was at my now deceased grandfather, who was an Assemblies of God pastor. It was at his church. They were hosting a week-long revival meeting, and so that's why I was at church on a Thursday evening. And I had grown up in the church, and that was largely due to the fact that my parents were divorced when I was 2 years old, and by the grace of God, my dad was able to get custody of me, which then resulted in us, being with my grandparents for a while, and again, by God's grace, allowing me to be raised in a Christian home. So my earliest memories are of being in church. But I can say that prior to that Thursday night in August of 1994, I'd never really had heard a sermon. Not one that actually pierced me in any significant way. And I remember listening to the guest speaker, who we know, who's a family friend, who had been staying at our home, and realizing as I was sitting in the pew that at 12 years old I hadn't really done anything wrong, but that I was a sinner in need of a Savior. And I got saved in that pew, and as is typical, in my grandfather's church, they had an altar call, and I could not get out of that pew fast enough because I had such deep desire to want to commit to Jesus. And so I approached the altar of the stage, and that family friend, that speaker, moved his handheld mic away and says, "What are you doing up here?" And I said, "I want to come to Christ." And it was at that moment, like you said, there's some overlap. It was at that moment, upon being saved, putting my faith in Christ, that I knew that I was called into ministry. At that moment, I knew that God had set me apart for pastoral ministry. Over the years, I'd love to say that it was kind of a smooth road to get to this point, but it has not been. That internal call, that inner sense of being called into ministry has been confirmed over the years by God's grace from different pastors and elders and professors. I, in large part due to Marcella's encouragement, I began to pursue education and ministry. I attended Trinity International University. We actually both did. And I got a bachelor's degree in Christian ministry, which is a bit of a misnomer. It was most of my emphasis and study was in biblical studies, also in counseling, pastoral counseling, biblical counseling. And as soon as I was done with my bachelor's degree, I enrolled in seminary, got accepted into Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando, and our plan was to move to Orlando so that I'd go to school. I had gotten a transfer from my job. I had been in banking since I got out of high school. And we were in the process of changing churches from the church we met at. So we had been going to that church, and I had been attending a PCA church for evening services on Sunday because it aligned with my personal convictions. And we felt like that wasn't, when we were ready to make the move, we felt like that wasn't really the church for us. And so we landed at Granada Presbyterian Church, the PCA church, on a Sunday morning about maybe a month or two before Easter. And Marcella had not been to a PCA church as of yet. And so our youngest son was just a few months old. And so I said, look, why don't you stay in the service, get a feel for what a PCA church is like, and I'll go with Adam to the nursery. And I did, and being there, I was able to meet the associate pastor's wife, and in just getting to know each other, I said, yeah, we're probably going to be here for 6 to 8 months maybe, and then we're moving to Orlando, so I go to seminary. She's like, where are you going to go to seminary? I said, RTS. She's like, well, my husband's RTS alumni. I'd love for you to meet him. And so after the service, we got to talking, the four of us, and the associate pastor said, you're going into ministry. It seems like you have some ministry experience. You're going to seminary. You got your bachelor's degree in ministry. You're doing all this. Why don't we have a youth pastor position open here? Would you be interested? And we said no. And then it was what we said next that really threw him for a loop. We said, we just want to be healthy church members. And he said, did you say a healthy church member? And we said, yeah. And then he gave me this pity-filled pat on the shoulder and said, okay, buddy, we'll be talking. I hope seminary goes well. And it was a few weeks after that where we were leaving a restaurant after church, and we ran into, we didn't even know who it was, but we just knew that he was giving announcements at the church. He was an executive pastor. Approached me and said, hey, aren't you Mike Hernandez, the seminary guy? And Marcella immediately got up and left. She knew this is the moment. I said, yeah, that'd be me. Nice to meet you. He's like, hey, listen, we have this youth pastor position open here at the church. Would you be interested? And before I could say no, he's like, look, why don't you come and talk to me about it? So I said, okay. He invited me to come on a Wednesday night for youth group, and it took a whole 20 minutes to be around those kids to know, this is what I wanted to do. And so I took that call to be the youth pastor at Granada Presbyterian Church. I was there for 4 years, and during that 4 years, I finished seminary. I got my MDiv at Knox Theological Seminary in Fort Lauderdale. Got licensed and ordained, and took a call to become assistant pastor for organization and ministry at Pinelands Presbyterian Church. And I served there for 2 years prior to taking the call here.
Now, help us, really helpful, Mike, in terms of timeline and all that, how long ago then was that moment when you started seminary and kind of went into ministry right about the same time? How long ago was that?
Yeah. So I took the call at Granada in 2013, and that was in the summer, and I started seminary in January of 2014.
And you were ordained?
2017. So I finished seminary, and I think it was a month or so after I was ordained.
Got it. Okay. And you've been in full-time ministry that whole time then, the last
Yeah, it'll be 11 years. Yeah, 10 years. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Marcella, would you share your personal testimony with us?
Yeah, sure. Is this on? Yeah. So I come from a really big family. I'm one of 6 kids. I have 5 brothers. And so my life growing up was not easy. Certainly very eventful, I'm sure. But I was raised Roman Catholic. My mom is a practicing Catholic. And so we grew up going to church on Sundays and Easter and Christmas. And it was a regular thing. And there was always something about God that was drawn, that I was drawn to. I was drawn to the things of God. I was drawn to the fact that God was so big and that he could do so much. And it was just something that always drew me in, but I was never really committed, to the faith. It was more of just like something in the background for me growing up. And I missed a little bit of a part where I lived in a different country. I lived in Colombia, South America. My dad's Colombian, my mom's American. And I lived there till I was about 10 years old. And then coming here, I don't know if it was culture shock. I don't know if it was just because it was transitioning into my adolescence. But I had a very tumultuous, rebellious adolescence. It was a really hard time for me, I think, in just trying to figure out life. So I made some very poor choices, did not have very good friends, was not surrounded by, any good influences. I can't say that I had that growing up. So I did come to faith when I was 19. I started going to a charismatic church with a family member who had some pretty significant life changes as a result of putting her faith. So I think her testimony in and of itself kind of spoke to me and was like a very vivid and practical way of like how God was transforming her life at the time and how much I felt like I needed that. So that's kind of how I came to faith through that experience. So I do not remember what I was wearing, but I do remember that I, just felt very humbled and had this enormous sense of need for God, that I could not continue to do what I was doing on my own, and that I needed something way bigger than myself to figure things out and to, carry on with life. So came to faith at 19, met Mike shortly after. Let's say it was like 2006 or so when we met. He started coming to the church where I was already, a member of.
Changed your life.
It sure did. Sure did. So, and I remember at the time you expressing, this sort of internal call to like, I think I'm going to be a pastor one day. And I remember at the time just brushing it off like, yeah, sure. Whatever that means, I don't know. But, just in getting to know him and in our relationship growing, just realizing how much that was just true. I could see it at the time, and I could see how God had gifted him and enabled him. Anyway, so we got married. Then I went to college. I went to school for education, so I have a degree in elementary ed. We had our two boys, Aiden and Adam, and then I don't know. I guess fast forward to where we're at now. It's been quite the journey. I must say, a lot of ups and downs, especially in terms of having to wrestle with doctrine, things that I was taught that I had to unlearn, things that I didn't understand, that I had to wrestle with and come to grips with as well. I think that has also added to some of the maybe frustration, I would say, with church life in general. So for me, just being able to grow alongside with Mike over the years has been a huge blessing. And then, of course, I feel like coming here to Delaware has been more than what we could have ever really expected or hoped for, that God would bring us to and lead us. So, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
It's the land of milk and honey here. Welcome.
It's the
Glad you
promised
guys
land
like
for
it.
sure,
Amen.
for sure, the
Promised
promised
land,
land.
Right.
If you could
Absolutely right.
hang there, because I just want to key off of something you said there. As we consider Mike as the pastor here, one of the qualifications for pastor is how they manage their own home and how they manage and pastor their immediate and first flock. How would you share Mike has pastored you and the boys and your home? Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think given a little bit of my childhood, part of my childhood, part of my adolescence, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm just wired to think a certain way. And I can be very, black or white or very extreme, all or nothing, kind of thinker. And Mike has just really been really instrumental in helping me think through that and been very patient with me and leading me into finding, the gray sometimes or finding the middle. I think that's been really pivotal, I think, for me in my walk and in my own personal life. He is a wonderful husband. I really cannot say enough good things about Mike at any given time. But he's a great father. I said this the first interview process when we first had come here. Somebody had asked me that if I had any fears of, how Mike would put the church first or anything like that. And it was a very clear-cut answer for me. And I remember saying, I don't have any concerns about feeling like I'm going to be second or my family is going to be second. The church is a huge priority. The church is a huge part of our life and what we do. But I never feel, I always feel like I'm number one. I mean, of course, the Lord, but I always feel like we are prioritized in a way that really helps to keep us unified and together and feel like we can just continue growing.
That's helpful. Thank you for sharing that. That is important to have that balance in life, especially in the ministry, which can be utterly consuming. But it's helpful to hear that background. Any questions before we move forward? Just on background, the microphone is here in the center. I think there's note cards as well. We got Evan Fleet of Foot, Evan Warner back there. If you have a question, so there's the mic. If you want to jump up to the mic, or you can just raise your hand if you have a question. So, yep, go for it, Gordon.
Marcella, you were talking, so I'll just address my question for you. You did not mention anything about being involved in the ministry of the church. And I understand as a mother and a wife and all that, you got plenty to do. But do you see I'm not in the women's ministry, obviously. But that's one of the
Nor
things.
will you be.
Right. But that's one of the things I'm interested in, because some pastors' wives do a little bit in the ministry and some do a whole lot. So give us some examples.
Sure. So I would say that, obviously my main ministry and priority has always been to my family, my husband, support them, raising our kids. This is the most that I've ever been involved in terms of ministry and being active. I feel, in a visible sense, somewhat of a visible sense. I think in the past it's been more of completely behind the scenes, just giving Mike the space to be able to do what he needs to do, and just give him room, to do that. Whereas for me during that time, I had 2 smaller kids. I was working full time as well. So it looked a little different then than it does now. I think now I would say that I'm more hands-on. And though a lot of you may not see me up here or, front and center type thing, I do feel most comfortable working behind the scenes and doing things, I guess in an administrative sense, it would apply, where I just do better with organization, with structure, with putting things together. And then as far as, moving forward or the future and what I see for myself, I think a lot of it does revolve around doing ministry together with Mike. We do a fair amount of counseling together now, and it's something that I'm in the process of also pursuing a degree in as well. So I think that that's an area that I would say is a strong suit for me. I do well one-on-one. I like going deep with my relationships, and so sometimes that might not necessarily be broad and wide, but I do find it really meaningful to build closer relationships and to do more one-on-one things. Right now, I am currently serving in youth ministry and in children's ministry, and I think that's somewhere where I would like to continue.
Youth and children, also an area you're not involved in, Gordon, because you're not youth and children. You had mentioned your pursuit of a degree. We've talked about your education as background, but there's also education in the foreground as well. Maybe talk a little bit about your educational pursuits going forward a little bit, Mike.
Yeah, so it's always been a personal goal of mine to pursue doctoral work. And that's just largely driven by the fact that I simply want to contribute academically to the church. I've said it publicly before, and I'll say it again. One of my deepest convictions is that theology should be done in service to the church. And so, by God's grace and being here, and because of your generosity, largely, I'm able to pursue a doctorate of ministry. Doctor of Ministry degree. I've only one class under my belt currently. Just scheduling things has made it a little difficult to get around to. But I'm a finisher, so I'm going to start something. I'm going to finish it. I love academia. I love studying. I'm just a learner, and a lifelong learner. And that was one of the things when I was in seminary considering PhD work. That was one of the things that my advisor said to me. He's like, if you're going to pursue doctoral work for a job, don't do it. If you're going to pursue it because you want to learn and contribute to the church, then do it. I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so I'm currently enrolled in Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando. It's 2 classes a year, January and in July. And I'm currently on the Reformed ministry track with the hopes, and I say with hopes because these things can change, but as it stands currently, my hope is to, when it comes down to my final project and dissertation, my hope is to create a discipleship methodology and philosophy specifically for Presbyterian polity.
Maybe that's a good segue into the first question, which came from online here. This is kind of a multifaceted question, and I'll give it to you, actually. It may be hard to keep track of, but it says, how do you feel uniquely called to lead and shepherd Crossroads? You're talking about discipleship there. Mm-hmm. And stay true to the vision of Crossroads, which was laid out in that job description there. Are there any gospel-centered areas that you feel are missing from Crossroads and that you would like to incorporate in our vision or ministries?
Yeah, it's fine. I'll just take a stab at it. Yeah, as far as, so I'll answer this backwards, and then perhaps you can remind me of what the rest of the question says. As far as gospel-centered areas that need, what does it say, need change? It
says, are there any gospel-centered areas that you feel are missing from Crossroads that you'd like to incorporate?
Yeah.
Any things you want to introduce?
I would say that I love everything about Crossroads. I love what makes it unique and distinct. I am married to those distinctives. As far as a gospel-centered area that may be missing, I wouldn't necessarily say that it is missing. What I do see that would be in order is a church-wide discipleship initiative and program. There is a lot of talk about discipleship, especially in PCA churches, and what I've seen, hence why I want to dissertate on this question, is there seems to me a discipleship deficit. So there's a lot of talking about it. It's almost like a buzzword, but not a lot of philosophy and methodology on how to actually execute it. And what I've seen at Crossroads, which is a very biblically literate congregation, I think there's a desire for it. As we have taken the pulse of the congregation, I think there's a desire for it. I think people want to go deeper. That appeals to me. I think that one of the things that make this possible distinctly at Crossroads is the fact that you actually like each other. And so that is actually fertile soil for discipleship to happen. This is also part of my conviction of 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul says, hey, Timothy, what you have heard from me, entrust to faithful men to teach others also. And so clearly for Paul, there's this sort of top-down understanding and method to have a church discipled. That 2 Timothy 2:2 is not only Paul's discipleship program, but also Paul's church growth plan. I think as it begins inwardly from the session, it starts to work outwardly to the church, and what happens from that is actually replication. Disciples beget disciples. And that's what I think, again, not necessarily missing, because I think we do discipleship in different ways, but I think an overall discipleship vision needs to be cast and executed. As far as how, I believe the first part of the question is how I'd shepherd the church. Is that right? Am I saying that right? How do I feel?
It's more about the call.
Okay.
how do you feel uniquely called to lead and shepherd Crossroads and stay true to
Yeah.
the vision
Mhm.
and some of the distinctives?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, well, I'd answer that by saying I do feel uniquely called to Crossroads. Otherwise, I would have never taken the call to begin with and uproot my family. We love Delaware, but it wasn't necessarily a call to live in Delaware. It was a call to come and pastor the flock of God that is among me, which is you. And so, like I said, as it relates to the vision of Crossroads, I'm married to those distinctives. I am well aware that Crossroads will turn 31 this year, and there is a history and way of being that exists that preceded me. And I am completely fine with living with those distinctives. We are truly a unique church, and I would never want to change the things that make us unique.
What would you say, you've been in a few other churches, obviously as an attending on staff, what would you say makes Crossroads different or unique from those other churches and that contribute to your desire to be here as the senior pastor as opposed to someone else,
Yeah.
somewhere else?
Yeah, I think it's commitments to faithful expository preaching. I think every church would say that, but I think it's commitment to faithful shepherding. And as an aside, I'll say I think part of that is just being accessible. I want to be accessible. Part of my pastoral ministry philosophy comes from Eugene Peterson. You've heard me say this before, where he boils down pastoral ministry to two things. He says, love God and live in the middle of your congregation. I want to live in the middle of my congregation. That's what I want to do. But I believe that, again, that's not something unique to me, but that's something that preceded me. That's something that is what Crossroads does. I'd also say committed to the distinctives of missions. This is the most mission-minded, mission-oriented church I've ever been a part of. I love that. I think churches need to globalize. And so if you think almost in concentric circles, right? So Crossroads does a great job of globalizing. But I think what the strong shepherding will do here, working inwardly, is allow us to have a presence in our community. And you've heard me ask this before. If Crossroads were to die tomorrow, would anyone in our community know? And the only way we could faithfully answer that is like, did we do everything we could to faithfully shepherd these people? And did we just reach out to our community and try to bring them in and shepherd them as well?
I thought you were going to say the only way we could know that is if we die. I hope that doesn't happen.
I thought about it. Yeah, so it's also, I mean, and this is like something really new for us, it's Crossroads' commitment to adoption. I did not know any adopted children or like adoptive families in Miami. I was born and raised there. I think I knew one family in the two churches that I served at. So the fact that that's a distinctive of Crossroads is frankly pretty remarkable to me. That we're so committed to adoption. Something that we've wrestled with quite a bit, as far as something that we should do. I'm not saying that everyone needs to adopt, but what I am saying is that the commitment to that vision, the commitment to loving children, appeals to me because I love kids.
We open it up here. Just give an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions here. We do have a hand here, Evan, or Alvaro, you can step up to the mic there if you prefer.
As a native from Colombia myself, I would like to know exactly what drew Marcella to Michael, and conversely, Michael to Marcella.
You go first. Be kind.
It was his bewitching good looks. So when I met Mike for the first time it was like a young adults after service gathering dinner. I sat across from him, and He had no idea who I was. But he doesn't remember that day, but I remember that day very clearly. And as time went on, I think this was before you had started coming to the church. Once he had officially come to the church and become a member, we became really good friends. And for me, it was just the godliness and his pursuit for the Lord that drew me to him. It was just something that I really admired, but also just found remarkable that someone would be this transparent with their faith and with their journey. So for me, that was probably the main thing apart from.
Yeah. So I don't remember seeing Marcella at that gathering. I do remember the first time I saw her at church. Because I said to a friend of mine who was standing next to me, so Marcella had gotten to the church, and the first thing that stood out to me were her shoes, because she had some really cool, it was like Bo Jackson Air Max. They were just awesome. And I was like, she's also beautiful. And then I said to the guy next to me, I was like, how come no one's ever told me about this girl? This is actually criminal. Yeah, so we became friends. What Marcella didn't say, probably, like I said, being kind to me, was I broke into her friend group, and then I stole her friends. Like, they became my best friends, and, and it was just, yeah, we all became good friends, but I actually kind of went in and hijacked your friends group a little bit. Thank you for letting me in. Yeah, for me, it's very similar, Alvaro, to her. What attracted her to me was just her seriousness about the Lord. At the time when we were friends, I was like anti-dating. I was anti, like, I'm not talking to any girls, and that just had to do with just a time that I had walked away from the Lord for a while. But she was a godly woman, and I'd say this as an aside for you young people: every man of God wants a woman of God, and every woman of God wants a man of God, and she was a woman of God. And aside from her bewitching good looks, that's what drew me to her.
But also that I was Colombian.
Also, that she was
Also.
Colombian was a huge plus. It was awesome. I was so happy about that.
First 10 years or so, right, in Colombia?
Yeah, and it's really been.
You were born in New York.
I was born in New York, but just culturally, it's just been something that has stuck with our family, including my mom, who's 100% American, German American. So it's just a culture that's really been embedded in us as kids and as a family.
Questions? Just want to open it up here. Make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask questions if they have any. Christy.
You talked a little bit about the distinctives of Crossroads. I guess I'd be interested in your time here. What do you think are some of the challenges we face, and how do you see yourself addressing them?
That's a great question. I think some of the challenges might be, if I'm going to be frank, I think some of an idealized version of the past. I've heard a lot of great things about Jim and Josh and how they work together. Again, that precedes me, so I can't speak to that. But I think, like everything else, I think there might be this underlying desire to return to that. I'm all for that. I love working with Dave. We work really well together. And that's a bit of, I'm actually underselling it a bit. We locked arms. And I need Dave. And I don't know, Dave needs me. Yeah, he's a brother, and like he's become a close friend of mine, and that means something to me because I don't have many close friends. He's a part of this very small inner circle. But I would say, we all have the tendency to remember things and almost give it this sort of Edenic ideal. And perhaps it was like that. I don't know. I think that may be a challenge, because I think it has the potential. It has a potential. I haven't seen this yet. But it has a potential of perhaps even inhibiting some of our vision and growth. Because there's this desire that we need to look a certain way. Does that make sense? But here's what I would say is the upside. I've never found Crossroads to be an unreasonable congregation. I think they're willing. I think that better than any church we've been at, certainly, Crossroads loves and supports its pastors. So all I could say to that is I hope that they continue to love and support Dave and I, So I'd say that's probably the most visible challenge I see currently. Like I said, Crossroads is a responsive congregation. And so I think that's good fertile soil for us to infuse the church with vitality, is what I would say.
Dave, this is directed at you. We met the other night with Mike and Marcella, and you expressed your deep love, your deep desire to co-pastor with Mike, and how meaningful that is to you. And Mike was just talking how distinctive that is of this church. And we as the congregation, I think, desire that kind of leadership. Would you speak to that again? And also mention how great the session is.
Yes, so first of all, the session is incredible, and let me just talk about Bud Downey for a couple minutes. Yeah, and I've tried to be somewhat cautious and careful in the sense that I want to be careful and cautious not to overexert any influence or give the impression that I want to be overly influential or try to be more influential than I should be, because I really do think this is an initiative of the congregation. The congregation needs to make their decisions. But as Bud had shared, working together as a pastoral staff really requires a significant amount of personal chemistry, shared philosophy, deep friendship, because it is such an intense work that really doesn't end. Goodness, when I worked in banking, I had weekends. I remember that, but it doesn't happen anymore, and so you're always you're always kind of I guess I would say like in the foxhole with the person that you're in ministry with. I'm getting emotional. I'm verklempt. No, if I do, you can't. Then.
No, I will.
The other thing you find in ministry, I think, is that it requires a certain personalities that have strength in their own ways. And so to have strong personalities that can work together and mesh together and form well together as a team really requires, like I said, good chemistry, good friendship, good unity, good purpose of mind. And I have found that to be tremendously true with Mike and I as we've been able to work together and form together and lead together and guide together as elders and as members of the same team. And I can't imagine a better person, for not just for me to be partnered with, but also for Crossroads to have as a pastor and also as part of a pastoral team that is unified and focused on the same vision. And Mike and I aren't the same. We're not clones of one another. We're actually very different in a lot of ways, but different in complementary ways, not in opposing ways, and different in ways that we allow each other to speak into each other's lives, to sharpen one another, to sharpen our ministries, and to be able to work through things very well, which is an important aspect of any team. It's an important aspect of a husband and wife, and it's an important aspect of any partnership, any close spiritual partnership. And we have been able to develop that relationship in a really, in a way that I'm incredibly grateful for, and just have a great deal of confidence in what God has been able to do in building us as a partnership and what he can continue to do. So.
I love what you just said. That was great. So my question is, you said the word growth. So at one point here at Crossroads, we actually had went to 2 services to accommodate the number of people that were here. And then there was talk of a church plant. So what is your sweet spot or your sweet number that you would be comfortable with Crossroads growing to before you considered a church plant? Or are you in favor of a mega church?
Yeah. That's a great question. No, I'm not in favor of a mega church. That would, if I could be a bit more crass, but that'd ruin our identity. It'd run it to the ground. And nor do I see any biblical precedent for it. So I am all for church planting. I think that if we grew, now this is not a decision that I'd make unilaterally, of course not. We're a plurality of elders, so it would have to be unified vision. I will say this much, and Crossroads is proof, you could do a lot with 250 people. So if we were to double in size, I'd say, let's split the congregation. Let's do gospel ministry a couple miles down the road, because we can. Because I believe so much in what we're doing and our approach to ministry, that the team dynamic is very distinct, the things that we're committed to. I'd love to see another Crossroads somewhere else in Delaware, because I think the people of Delaware benefit from it. I'm very convinced that we're doing a lot of great things here, and that we will continue to do a lot of great things. And if that could be replicated and duplicated, that's a no-brainer for me.
Let me go to one question that was submitted online, because I do want to get to these. It says, please comment on your preference for music at the worship service, i.e., do you prefer all contemporary, combination of hymns of the faith and contemporary, or more traditional?
Gregorian chants didn't make the list. That's my.
Or Gregorian chants.
Can you imagine that? Yeah. I love what we're doing here. I've always been for a more blended style of contemporary and hymnody. So that'd be my preference. There are things in the more contemporary realm that I am not for. That could be a conversation for another time. But I think what we do as far as just a blended service, I think appeals to both older and younger people in the congregation, because we would want to connect to both.
Denver Barty, step right up to the mic. If you have questions, you can come stand to the mic. We can make a little line if you want, but if you'd like to, you can come up to the mic or just raise your hand.
Mike, since you've been here, you've been a leader of the youth program, and it has grown tremendously, certainly. If you become senior pastor here, how will that be maintained? I guess an add-on question to that would be, this would probably be more question for the session. Is it appropriate that we bring on another pastor to pick up what you've done with the youth? How will that whole program be maintained?
So I'll answer the second question first. Yeah, I believe that it is entirely appropriate to bring on another member of the staff. I think that Crossroads would benefit from a strictly youth pastor. I was hired to do family ministry. I am not a youth pastor in the truest sense, like I was in my first ministry job. Youth pastors will also do campus ministry, and that's usually how youth ministries grow. I did a lot of campus ministry when I was a youth pastor, but because my duties are so broad here, that's one of those facets of student ministry that I was not able to do, albeit being a desire when I first got here. So I think it's entirely appropriate as to how the student ministry will be maintained. And I feel comfortable answering on behalf of the session. We would not just bring in anyone. That person that candidates for that position would have to buy into the vision of Crossroads. And that person would need to know, which has been my conviction since day one of ministry, is that that person needs to know that he is ministering, albeit to younger ages, to real people of a real congregation that will eventually be in the seats that you're sitting in. So that person would need to be unified in our vision as a church. And for it to be maintained, he would have to be committed, because I'm committed to the students of Crossroads. I love these kids. And I think we've been able to do some really great things over the last 3.5 years because of my commitment to them, because of Marcella's commitment to them, and our shared vision for discipleship. So that person that comes on would need to be committed to those very things, and he'd certainly need to love kids.
Aside from space, what do you see as our greatest resource limitation right now? Leaders, staff, finances, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I would say we could certainly use more volunteers in nursery. Thus saith the Lord. Yeah, I think manpower in that regard. We have a lot of children at Crossroads, and so serving them is important. They are covenant children. So I'd say we can certainly use more manpower in that area of ministry. I mean, you touched on finances. There was an update recently. We're in a little bit of a deficit. To that, I would say God is going to be faithful to His church. There might be seasons of abundance and there might be seasons of lack. But God's going to take care of His church, provided that we continue to be faithful. Right? It's like I've said in the past, and I've said to Dave host at times. It's not about being a success or a failure. It's about being faithful. And if we continue to be faithful in our shepherding, I always believed that would result in faithful giving. And so, I mean, it takes effort from the congregation. It takes them buying into what we're doing. But ultimately, God's going to take care of His church. And you touched on, aside from space, I think that's the biggest limitation. But you should still serve a nursery.
Mike, I actually have a question. So, if you become senior pastor, what would your role with the youth look like as a senior pastor compared to what it is now as what you are?
Because Evan doesn't know exactly what I am. I love you, man. Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd still be involved in youth the same way I have been for the last 3.5 years until we transition someone else into that role. The day that someone gets hired doesn't mean that I will automatically step away from student ministry. I'd want to onboard that person. Um, I'd also want to see, because this is a reality, that he might be the right man for the job in a lot of ways, and you guys might have difficulty assimilating to his way of being and leadership. So it's going to take some time for me to help you guys along the transition too, because you're transitioning too, not just him. So I'd still be on board, and not just me, but Marcelo will be there as well. Specifically walking alongside the younger girls of the student ministry.
Other questions? Graham. Yeah, sure. Actually, Evan's coming around there, so you can probably just stay put. We'll go Graham and then Gordon.
Mike, there's been a lot of talk, looking back this morning, where the church has come from, where you've come from. And that's, in my mind, stands in juxtaposition to a word that has also been frequently used this morning, which is vision. So my question really, recognizing that any change is going to have some impact on where we're headed, what's your vision for where this church might be in 5 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say in 5 years, I believe that everyone here would have been discipled very well, and that a culture of discipleship would have been created in such a way as that everyone that walks through those doors will get discipled. That is my main commitment. And that comes from a conviction that everything we do should orbit around discipleship. I hope that in 5 years' time, we can remedy some of our space issues. Before I got here, and up to the point where I got here, there was talks about a phase 2. I wasn't in those conversations. I was just brand new to the church, and then COVID happened. 8 months later after we got here. And so I'd like to revisit those conversations. Again, and that's not just this mentality of like build it and they will come. That's not my mentality at all. It comes from a place where I really believe that we're doing great things here. And if someone is not at Crossroads on a Sunday, I really think they're missing out. I really believe that. So that's where I hope we could be in 5 years. I've done all the lofty vision talks. I've read the vision books. And to me, vision often gets hijacked by dreams. I'm not a dreamer. I'm a planner. And I'm realistic. And I ain't about getting a mega church either. So if I want people discipled, I want our space to be better accommodating for the growth that I believe is coming. And I want to plant churches.
Gordon?
Mike, you've explained more about this teamwork that is one of the unique things described in the CPC attributes. And we don't see that, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this kind of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, most of us see you either in the pulpit on Sunday or teaching Sunday school. That's how we interact with you, not uniquely, but for a lot of us, that's mostly what we see. So I appreciate what you've brought up about your teamwork and how you work with each other and so on. And what that says to me, too, is if for some reason we were to consider somebody from outside the church, I don't have any experience in the previous churches I have where we have that kind of sharing of the pulpit or even the adult Sunday school. And I assume you've been in churches that are more where the senior pastor does the lion's share of the preaching.
Mm.
So we need to be thinking about the uncertainty involved when you've been here and you've experienced and you've been, I will use the word, a successful part of the team. How can we, if we were to ever consider somebody from outside the church who has not actually been in this kind of a role with a team approach, how can we be confident in their being able to work in this environment when they've never been in it? And so my question is this, is do you have any experience of other team type roles for the leadership, the pastoral leadership of the church? Have you seen them work like it works at our church?
No.
Okay, and so I hope what people walk away from this meeting is that it's very risky in terms of what we want to go outside the church, particularly with a person who's not actually worked in a team ministry approach, including preaching and all the teamwork things you described as how you support each other and all that kind of stuff. So that should be something we take away from this meeting.
Hey, Mike. We've
Oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
Hey, Mike. We've worked together for many years, a couple years now, in various close contexts, and I've appreciated that time with you. I appreciate your vision for robust discipleship, for challenging the body to walk closely with the Lord. I just want to share one verse and ask you one question. This is from 1 Thessalonians 5:14. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. I think my question is, how do you see yourself equipped to pastor those who are new to the faith, struggling in their faith, hurting in their faith? What is your mindset towards caring for those who may be in some of those situations and may be hurting?
Yeah, it's a great question, brother. I think you described most everybody in the church. I think that majority of us are, as far as the younger people are concerned, they're figuring themselves out. They're figuring out if their faith is their own or their parents'. I think even the more people around our age, young families, I think they're just trying to stay afloat and not feel like they're drowning all the time. I've seen that it is very difficult for families that are our age. It's hard to do any kind of meaning discipleship with their families. They outsource that so much to the church. And while I think it is the primary responsibility of a family to do it, if they want to outsource to us, then we'll take it. We'll take it, because part of our commitment to any church member is that we are being and have taken responsibility for their discipleship. And to even the most seasoned among us, I think that there's still struggles. I think there's still pain. I think there's still hurting. I think there's still weakness. I mean, that is, good grief, if there's anything that unites us, it is our collective sinful weakness. We're all weak. And so I know that about myself, and I think that allows me, and I'm a relational minister to begin with, but that allows me, and it feeds more of my desire to live in the middle of my congregation. I want to pastor the people here. I so desperately do, because I've been a part of a congregation where that's not happening. So I want to be in the lives of our parishioners, and I want to see, more than anything, I want to see all of us, regardless of age, grow in grace and in godliness.
Looking at some of the questions online, some of these have some overlap. There's one here that I'm going to just jump into and try to ask it in a way that maybe doesn't cover an area we've already covered. We've talked a little bit about areas in the body life where you could see strengthening, typically discipleship, or notably discipleship. We talked about continuity and the distinctives. In terms of change, the question here is, how would you implement change? Instruction from the pulpit through the session, assessing congregational needs. And then there's another question here that we could probably touch on and maybe land there unless there are other questions.
I'll tackle that one.
Okay.
That's a good question. As to how we'd affect change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, like I'd mentioned to Chrissy about church planting and stuff. That's like I'm a Presbyterian, so I am not here to make decisions unilaterally. I'm here to lead and to guide the men of the session. But I am one amongst a plurality of elders, and I recognize that, and I'm completely comfortable in that system. If not, I wouldn't be here. So change comes through, I believe, first and foremost, just because of just the nature of what we do. I think it's going to come through us taking an accurate pulses of the congregation, discussing those things with our session, and coming to decisions to affect change. As to whether that gets communicated from the pulpit, the pulpit was called a sacred desk for a reason. Because it is sacred, and what should be proclaimed from behind the pulpit is the gospel. So I would not reserve any kind of communication as far as casting vision or things like that, or changes from the pulpit on the Sunday morning. We have announcements for those things. We have other ways of communication, but what is happening on a Sunday morning behind the pulpit is a sacred moment. In fact, the most sacred thing that is happening at any point and any day of the week. And so I would say that, for the sake of reiteration, that will come through other forms of communication. Like I said, announcements, light posts, Facebook, whatever means and media we use. But none of those decisions or any kind of changes will happen unilaterally, but will come through the collective decision making of the body of men that you elected to represent you.
One other question here. What areas of doctrinal teaching are foremost going forward? Any specific emphases? And maybe this would be a good chance to talk maybe a little more broadly about maybe your philosophy on teaching and preaching and things like that. So.
Well, I mean, I just shared a little bit of that now. That it is the most important thing that is happening in the week, is the proclamation of the gospel and the administration of the sacraments. This is how God speaks to his church. So as far as like doctrinal things?
It says, what areas of doctrinal teaching are foremost? Development, practice spiritual gifts, instructional giving, teaching helps on sharing the gospel, other things that are on your minds.
Yeah, it seems like the question is more didactic. Like, how do we train people?
Maybe.
I'll just take it that way, I guess.
Yeah, maybe maybe I can actually jump in on this one. I think the philosophy that we have taken on some of that largely is that the combination of preaching and Sunday school gives an opportunity to take a book of the Bible, preach through it, so that what's being preached is what's in the text. That's what we're focusing on. Mm-hmm. So what we'll preach on next week is what's in the text, not actually what I care about or what Mike cares about or anything like that. That keeps the minister accountable to make sure that they're not preaching on the thing that is most interesting to them, because everybody has interests and everybody has. So our preaching philosophy generally is that, to take a book of the Bible, to preach through it, to try to teach the whole counsel of God in that, but recognizing when you're in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John for a number of weeks, you're missing other larger dimensions of teaching, and that's where Sunday school gives a little more flexibility to hone in and focus in on specific areas and needs that the congregation can be instructed on, whether it's a particular matter of body life or cultural engagement or whatever it may be. So that's a bit of the 1-2.
Yeah, and we have, men's and women's Bible study too, that contributes to that, and the things that are happening for family ministry, Rooted, Blossom Girls, Salt and Light.
Why don't we take one more question? I know we're probably pressing our limits here on time, so we'll take one more question, then we'll wrap after that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, hey, Mike. I'd just like to hear a little bit more specifics. When you were talking, you said you're a planner, and you talked about discipling every person that comes through the door. Could you just maybe in outline form offer some specifics and what would be like the first couple steps and how you would implement something like that on a church-wide basis? And if that, and where does that vision come from? Is it your vision? Is it from another church experience or something you've read? You know, are there books that you've read that have been, you said you're a scholar, you're interested in scholarship and reading. Are there books that you've read that have been transformative that possibly the congregation, you know, could read? But anyway, back to my original question. I'm just interested in hearing you offer some specifics on what would the first couple of steps look like to get everyone discipled who comes through the door. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I was actually hoping for this question, so thank you. I was very, very excited about this question. Yeah, so I would say the discipleship vision, and it is not my own vision per se, but like I said, 2 Timothy 2:2. What Timothy heard from Paul, he should pass on to other men who could instruct others also, right? And so 2 Timothy is, like every other Pauline letter, is a letter to Timothy, but for the church that he's pastoring in Ephesus. And so clearly, like I said, this is Paul's discipleship method and plan. And so when Paul is talking about entrusting the things that Timothy heard to other men who are faithful and can teach others also, I believe he's talking to the elders of the church. I think 1 Timothy support that conclusion. And so what this tells me is that a discipleship vision and method and philosophy must come from within the session, the elders, and work its way outward. Now, how does that happen? Well, it happens through identifying, inviting, and instructing. And so it is, the onus is on the session to identify those men who they want to disciple, but it is also our responsibility to identify women who can disciple other women. This is Titus 2, right? Women teaching other women, the older teaching the younger, and so on and so forth. So this discipleship vision comes from the pastoral epistles. So it must happen first through identification, identifying others they want to disciple. I think it works best when one discipler maybe has two to three disciplees. I think when you're discipling one-on-one, it can become, and I've experienced this, it becomes a counseling session. That's not what discipleship is. So I think 2 to 3 people they identify, they commit to one another for X amount of time. Sometimes that could be 12 months. Sometimes that could be 18 months. But that is up to the discipler, how long he feels like he needs to disciple those men. And the goal would be, like I said, identifying, inviting those men, instructing those men, and then lastly is where replication happens. Like I said, disciples beget disciples. My hope is that the 2 men that I'm discipling right now will take this vision and start to disciple other men. And those men, other men. And likewise with the women discipling women, and then those women, other women, and those women, other women, and that's how the church gets discipled. Because I believe that's a Pauline vision, and that's my vision. I hope that's helpful.
Ron's going into overtime here. Go for it, Ron.
Quick. First of all, thank you very much. I want to go on the side just a little bit. Something has been coming to my mind 2 or 3 nights in a row, and it's never happened before. I just want to say that Pastor Josh was on his time away. There was some very important things happening there, in my opinion, from what I feel. God wanted certain things to happen. One of the things that had to happen was that he had to have total trust in this guy right here. and believe in him all the way. Because when God wanted to speak to him, he needed more time to speak to him, and it became his whole life thoughts that were going to go in the future. So I think that if God convinced him that it was okay to stay a while, and the confidence that he's had in this young man here is very, very strong. And we just think that everyone should consider that. And all the years that we've known Josh and how dedicated he was, if he's feeling comfortable enough to stay a little longer and be happy with what's going to happen in his church, I think that says a lot, because we have a great deal of respect for Josh, and we have a great deal of respect for this young man right here and for you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Ron. With that, let me thank you, Mike and Marcella, for being here, for being so open, for sharing today. Let me just pray for us as we close. Father, we give you praise and glory, God, that you have founded a church, and that the church's one foundation is Jesus Christ the Lord, God. We acknowledge and recognize here that Christ is the head of the church, not anyone here, but that you have built your church and structured it and ordered it and given us teachers, God. And so as we embrace your word and your plan for the church and try to carry it out faithfully, God, we ask that we would do so with a clear mind, with wise hearts, with feet that are guided by your word, and with the direction of the Holy Spirit, and with the wisdom of many, God. We thank you for the building of your church here at Crossroads, and we pray that this would be a day that we can look back on years from now and be thankful for the faithfulness that was exercised here and that continues for many years to come. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone. And for those who are staying for the Ministry Leaders Luncheon, it's going to be right back there. And if anybody can help break down all those chairs in the back and bring some tables in, that would be a big, 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 big help.